Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will unfortunately be unloading a little bit of a rant about the Winnowing Flame Trilogy by Jen Williams. So this starts with the 9th Reign. This is the first book. I did do a full spoiler-free review for this book. I was already not keen on it, but I was hoping things would improve, and for me, they just really did not. I will link the review for this book if you want more specifics on just that, but I'll be talking about the whole trilogy here. General, the second book is The Bitter Twins, and it's followed by The Poison Song, at which point, once I got there, I just said, I can't do this anymore. I have to just be done with this series. So let's talk about it. So this series, and just to talk a little bit about, to kind of recap some of the things I said in my review for the first book, it seemed like it was really trying to do way too much. The first book is chock full of world building, and it's a fairly interesting world. We've got all these like different creatures and areas of the wild where the nature is super different. It's this very like, you know, eldritch, horror-themed almost at parts of the world that's being described, and it's being set up. But it felt like there wasn't really a whole lot that happened besides that. Even as early as the first book, too, we just see the characters where they kind of just go off on side quests, and then it seemed the author just decides, like, okay, I need this to happen next, so I'm just going to force the story to go there whether or not it makes any sense. Unfortunately, this was repeated many times, and it was when it was already happening again that I finally just kind of quit. I was ready to DNF this series in the middle of the second book, but I kept going because it was our official channel buddy read, and I hate to quit on official channel buddy reads, but I finally decided after getting, I got like 170 pages into the last book, and I'm like, I still have 400 pages left. This is just not worth it anymore. So, like I said, the world building in the first one I felt was somewhat of a positive. There was a little too much time spent on it. It was kind of all we did, but that was really the main thing it had going for it. I didn't care that much about any of the characters a whole lot, and it just, once again, was trying to do so many different things. So we're building this kind of, you know, like I said, almost Lovecraftian horror type of landscape. We're talking about it, but then we're also having like the adventure kind of plot where our characters are going off trying to discover stuff. And then we also have the Gerillia, which are the worm people, which are like alien bug people, basically, that are coming and trying to destroy the world. So we have all of these different things. One setup is kind of like a fantasy adventure story. One's like the setup of the actual world. Setup is almost more like a, you know, horror fantasy kind of vibe type thing. And then we also have like the sci-fi elements with the alien life forms. And it just never really came together to be very cohesive. We kind of just go through the story for a while until at which point the author seemed to realize, like, oh, I need to end this. So characters make a really stupid decision, and that's basically what sets up the entire rest of the series. They did something really dumb that if for one moment anyone would have thought about it, it seemed so blatantly stupid that it wouldn't have made any sense. And then the ending, and that just kind of soured the first book even for me. And book 2, unfortunately, kind of continued that trend. Book 2, it seemed like would focus on some different aspects of the story, but instead we continued on with, we're just going to force these characters to go on side quests, whether or not it made sense. There were passages that just did not seem to fit whatsoever. It just basically, we needed something to happen so that maybe like this character can't go on the quest, or like we need to introduce this. And so there were scenes that literally only exist to force something to happen. There's a scene where a character who can't go on the quest, literally, they're a completely meaningless scene. There's no point in the book at all except for them to get injured so that they can't go to a side quest. Like that, like stuff like that would happen. And the whole base plot of the second book, like the biggest part of it, also was just such a force and such a stretch that even though that was, unfortunately, that was the most interesting plot line for a while, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. We have characters just happen to stumble into some information, And despite being straight up told, like, oh, this isn't actually going to help at all, they're like, no, we have to do this. Forget everything we're worrying about right now. We're going to go off on this side quest and do this thing. And then it's kind of just drug out for the entire book. And that really seems to be what happens here, is we get characters who, for usually not much of a reason or for a dumb reason, just feel like they have to go do this just so that certain things can happen. And that's what really, really, really irritated me. And going into the third book, it just kept going. And that's kind of when I finally quit. There wasn't any, like, specific big thing. It's just I had read 170 pages, and I'm like, I still don't care, and this is still doing all of the same things. Down to a character who's straight up told by the other people they're with, like, hey, it doesn't really make sense to stop and go do that when we're on a really important mission. They're like, no, we're going to do it anyway. Just specifically so that they can stop and have something happen. And it's just kept happening, where these things really don't make any form of sense. And then we also have a character who's just randomly pulled away with no real explanation so that we can have them be off on their own, and also to create more drama and have more things happen. And that just really seems to be the main thing here. And I think that's the biggest issue I had. Really at no point do any of the plot lines or any of the character decisions seem natural and organic. They seem always like they're just forced into whatever the story happens to need, whether or not it makes any sense. And that is just really what kind of killed any enjoyment I could have had for this. Not to mention as well, the first book, like I said, spent so much time doing all of this world building, and then for the most part, we just kind of forget about that for the next two books. We spend very little time looking at those aspects of the world that were really the most interesting part of the first book. We just spent a ton of time setting this up, and then we're like, now we're going to go off and do other things and not even really focus on the world anymore. So even like the thing that I'm like, oh, this is interesting, just completely was dropped out of the story, and that is just really, once again, what kind of just killed any enjoyment I could have had for this series. I really don't have a lot of positive things to say here. Like I said, the world building was interesting, and the characters, some of them are fine. None of them, like I said, I feel like I have trouble really getting a lock on any of the characters and feeling like they're real people when the entire plots of all three books rely on them specifically doing things that make no sense, just to further the plot. But I didn't have any like major issues with the characters for the most part. It's just, once again, with how they're used, when they just make dumb decisions because that's what the story needs. I will also say, and I know I heard some other people say this as well, this screams YA book that's just trying way too hard not to be YA. And I think that's another thing where just the tone and the type of story is just so incredibly muddled that it's really hard to tell. There are quite a lot of parts of the book that seem like it's a much more YA premise, and I think it's like, I said that, I believe, on my first review too, if this was like a YA fantasy adventure novel, I think it could have worked. If it was going to be more of like a sci-fi type, alien invasion, trying to take over the world novel, that could have maybe worked as well, but we're just trying to cram in so many elements. None of it's cohesive, none of it really works together, and most of it doesn't seem to really serve a whole lot of purpose at all in general. There are some like really big reveals that happen throughout, and they just seem to get stranger and less important and relevant to whatever it is we're trying to do, down to where I'm in the third book and I still don't really know what the point is here, because it's not the war between the world and the aliens, because we just drop that for every little thing whenever we decide that we want to go play here or travel there or do this. So I really struggled to get any form of like cohesive just story or plot or character behavior, and all of it just seemed to be this just crazy mishmash, and it just really did not work for me. So at this point, I've already ranted for a bit, but I am going to talk some spoilers, because I feel like that's really what I need to do to finish my ranting. So I've been really vague so far and just done more bigger concepts. But from here, I kind of want to go through and just talk about my issues with each book, kind of like the really big things, and go from there. So I will have a tag down below so that you can skip to kind of the final thoughts part. If you've not read this series, I'll note that I only read up to page 170 Almost dropped it. 170 in the Poison Song, so even if you've read the first two, I won't be going any past that. I did not read far enough to really have major complaints, but there will be some minor spoilers for that part of the Poison Song when we get there. So let's talk a little bit more with it, and first with the Ninth Reign. So I alluded to the fact that the ending of the Ninth Reign had the characters making a really, really stupid decision in order to set up the rest of the trilogy. And that, of course, being they find this alien liquid that specifically comes from these alien invaders that specifically they know causes rapid growth of this alien landscape. Like the plants, they become not normal, like they grow extra big, but it's also they're clearly being affected by this in a way that's not native to this earth. And they're like, we're going to use this to save the tree god. And the thing that annoyed me almost more than the fact that they did it is that it works. Like, of course it backfires, because obviously it was going to, but it actually does work. It does, like, wake the tree up, and then we just say that, oh, well, it's because it woke the tree up, the Trilogy Queen was able to escape. And I'm like, I mean, it was really, really evident that when that was used, it was going to backfire, and it basically, like, the explanation that it did work is only done so that then the war beasts can be born. So that was just another example of something that was really dumb, but the way that it worked out in the book was specifically done in a way to force the story to move forward. Like, if anything, it would have corrupted the tree and made it something different, and it wouldn't have worked out, just based on what we've known about it. And then I commented, too, with, like, the supervillain ending, where the Trilogy Queen is, like, riding away on the helicopter, the corpse moon, whatever you want to call it, but that's exactly what it was, and takes Hestilian, who was not a character I particularly enjoyed anyway, with her. And Hestilian is a character that literally none of her decisions made sense whatsoever, and I feel like it was actually, she was the worst, by a touch, the worst character for having decisions make no sense at all, because in the first book, the whole plot about people having dreams about the worm people coming back is because she's causing it, because she wants some sort of help for the tree god, but then that all seems to be for nothing because she doesn't want anyone to go near the tree god. So even that whole thing, like, I don't understand what she was trying to accomplish, really, because got people to come, but then didn't really want them to do anything. And that was even before dumping the liquid on them was an option, so it really didn't make any sense. She decides to just go because she was tricked, and then just basically says, well, I guess I'm on your side now. And that happens in the second book, where she's just like, well, you know, I'm here. And then, specifically as well, feeding stuff to the dragon, the war beast, to make it a creature of the Trilogy. I'm thinking, like, that's not going to backfire at all. And then, literally, in the early part of the third book, like, she's completely just, not even just like, I guess this is who I am now. She's just completely like, nope, I'm just going to take control of the situation, and now I'm going to actively try and wipe out the life on my planet, for really no reason other than they let me come with them in the first book. And she seems to go back and forth in the second book a lot, where it seems like she's like, oh, you know, maybe I should try and leave. And then she's like, nah, I'm just going to be a bad guy now. None of it makes any sense whatsoever to me. And the other characters, we see big events like that once again, where it just doesn't make a lot of sense, or things are just being forced along. In the second book, we have the characters just happen to stumble upon some kid whose parents are dead, and they go into the house, and he just happens to have this amber tablet by the great artist Michael the Clear-Sighted, which is a map to get to the island that he famously sailed off to and never returned from, because they think they're going to find another, like, he thought he was going to find, like, another tree of the tree god. Like, the original tree came from there, is what the legend basically was. And they decide they're going to go, and they seem to be completely going because they want to find the other amber tablets, because of the fact that they're hoping that that will bring the memories back of the war beasts. Despite the one war beast with intact memories straight up saying, like, no, it's not going to work. But they're like, no, we stumbled across this, screw the war with the worm people, let's go on this long quest and get there. And then when they finally get there, and it's like, oh, the tree did come from there, but we have this whole thing where we're suspicious of the two Eberons there, which is all really like, yeah, they were terrible, but that was just even more of a misdirect, because there are the other aliens there who apparently decided to plant the tree, and they just were doing an experiment to see how the tree would work out on this world, and kind of watching and waiting to see what it did against the Derilia. And it's just like, even that, I'm like, really? Like, that's what we're going with? Is that not only, like, the aliens are invading, but now there's also another alien species who just randomly would go to planets and plant the tree god to see what happened? Like, that's kind of dumb as it is, and once again, didn't really seem to do a whole heck of a lot. And book 3, so many times early on, kept trying to make it seem like the tablets they got from there were somehow valuable, that they were getting information from them just to try and make it make sense that they went there. But no, there was really no reason to do it. But the author wanted us to have this thing where we see these other aliens, so that's why the whole quest had to happen. There were other plot lines that also really just did not make a whole lot of sense. Another where these characters go to another place because there's been like people missing near parts of one of the other like obelisk moon things, and they decide, they're like, oh, well, we better dig it up. That seems like the best way to do it, is dig it up, remove the rocks that are supposed to be like protecting it, and let's dig it up. And then what happens? Oh, well, you dug the thing up, so now it can rise up and fix itself. And it's just like, why was that the decision? Well, because that's what the story wanted it to happen. It wanted this other thing to come up and go from there, and so that obviously is what they had to do. These kinds of things just keep happening, and it really is just, so much of it just really is to push it along to go the way. And the third book as well, it just started going down that same direction. It did first off have Noon, who goes to and single-handedly destroys the Winnowing like it was nothing. Like, this is like the first chapter, which is very anticlimactic. But she does this, and that's because we need to have a couple of other characters that are going to feature really heavily in book 3, it seemed. And it's kind of whatever, but then we start going on, like, the side quests again. And we open up, too, with Tourmaline, who decides he needs to go find a sword in a tomb, and just to go there and not find it, and it's just random, pointless little side quest just to have him going out to do that. And there's so many scenes like that, where it's just, what is the point of this? This doesn't really make sense that this is something that they would be doing at the time. But then, it really went for me when, once again, we send, Vintage goes off on a quest, and Vintage is probably, like, I commented on Hestilian being the character with the choices that make the least sense. Vintage is probably a close second, and it's put as, like, her supposed to be this, you know, eccentric woman who's just super fascinated by things. So we get times, like, when things are okay, she's like, I want to stop and look at this. That makes a little bit more sense, but she also just will run off on a whim to go do other things as well. And so she was the one who, they're going to meet an enemy who has a war beast and is making them, like, look terrible, and they're potentially going to have to fight against. And she's like, let's stop for lunch with these fishermen, just kind of see what the people think. And that's the only explanation. Is like, oh, it's really important that we know the mood of the people in this area. No, it's not. It absolutely is not. It just was so that they can stop and feel the things that are happening instead of moving on to actually do what they're going to be doing. And we have the big fight scene. The last bit I read is when Tourmaline and the others are fighting against the Corpse Moon and the behemoths, and this is when Hestilian is now in charge, and it's the three of them, and they're fighting, and Noon, like, explodes and disappears, and is in the desert really far away talking to the, like, embodiment of the Winnow fire for some reason. And we get some more exposition, but no real explanations there either. And I just, once again, we're just kind of like, we're just going to pluck you out because I need the story to go a different way. So we're going to move you over here. And it's not good storytelling, is what it comes down to with so much of it. Now, so many of my complaints, this is not good storytelling. I feel like there is a story that could be told here, but with so much of it, it's just like we're cramming 3 different stories into one book. In each of these 3 books, it's like 3 different types of stories are being crammed into this trilogy, and none of them are being told well. That's where I think if this was, you know, written as more of a simplistic story, and I'm not saying like really simplistic, but simpler than it is, and it was just kind of following a specific thing. It just seems like the elements, there's so many of them that there's maybe not a way to handle them well at all. But there's parts of this I feel like that'd be interesting if maybe it was somebody else writing it in a different way. But the storytelling was just not good here. The author constantly would just take a heavy hand to force things along. And that's just kind of where we kept going over and over again. So this was a really disappointing series for me. I finally decided, like I said at the beginning of the video, when I got a little bit into book 3, I'm like, I'm done. I don't have time to read this anymore. I've read too much already. And so, unfortunately, that is just where I landed. I will immediately be unhauling this trilogy. It's not something I have any real desire to have, and I certainly wouldn't reread it. So it's just was really, really disappointing. I do think there were some elements that could have been good, and I know some people did enjoy this a bit more than I did, but by the end, it seems like most people were fairly disappointed. So it's really one of those things where I don't know, maybe some people did really like this for some reason. I'm not really sure what the reason people love this series. I know this was fairly popular for a bit, but also it's probably telling that it was never published outside of the UK. You know, maybe not popular enough, didn't have the sales to do that. So that could be why, but heck, I mean, it's getting like a new fancy release now, so what do I know? But it definitely wasn't for me. I just was really disappointed in this series, and it's made me realize that I need to be a lot more careful, or Andrew and I need to be more careful with deciding what our channel buddy reads are, because I really hope not to run into another thing like this. And so it kind of just is what it is. But those are really my thoughts on the Winnowing Flame trilogy. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. I know at least some people from Discord who are going to probably agree or have harsher opinions than I did with a lot of it, but I'm sure there are people out there who enjoy the series. If you're one of those people, I'm legitimately curious. Let me know, like, if you just disagree with my points, or if you saw things different ways, or kind of like what you liked about it, because I am curious. And you know, everything, you know, this is my view on a book series. Of course, it's subjective, so I'm not saying like I am absolutely right. This is just all of the things that did not work for me. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to chat. Hopefully not these books, but any books or really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.